Is Taylor Swift going to have to sit for a deposition in the Blake Lively-Justin Baldoni legal drama? Baldoni's lawyer just said something very interesting about that. We're going to get into this and other recent updates in this very high-profile case. Will Taylor Swift be deposed in this ongoing legal fight between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni? That's the question. Actually, it's one of many questions I have, but there have been so many updates in this case. The case, of course, of the actress suing her former It Ends With Us co-star and director, accusing him of sexual harassment on set, retaliation for allegedly launching a smear campaign against her for coming forward with her allegations against Baldoni, invasion of privacy, breach of contract, infliction of emotional distress, and so forth. Not only a lawsuit against Baldoni, but also his production company, the company's CEO, those who allegedly facilitated this smear campaign. But on the other hand, Baldoni has fired back. He filed a lawsuit against Lively, her husband Ryan Reynolds, her publicist, the New York Times, claiming they coordinated to level false allegations of misconduct against him, tarnish his reputation in the public, all the while that Blake Lively was trying to take control over this film from him. And there are other legal actions that have spun up as a result of this. In fact, I'll tell you, in a sidebar that we did yesterday, we talked about how another figure in this case, a man who was originally listed as a defendant in Blake Lively's original civil rights complaint, a man named Jed Wallace, has now filed a defamation lawsuit against Blake Lively, claiming she falsely accused him of being complicit in this smear campaign. And this all comes after a big hearing, the first court hearing this week. So you have a lot that's going on. I want to get into all of it. I want to talk about the Taylor Swift of it all. And let me bring in friend of the show, Bradford Cohen, acclaimed attorney to the stars. Bradford, thanks so much for coming on. Before we get into anything else, I got to ask you about the big Taylor Swift question. So let me just lay it out, if you think she'll be deposed. And before I even ask you that, let me explain to everybody why she could potentially be deposed, what her role is in all this. So in Justin Baldoni's lawsuit, he alleges that he felt pressured by Ryan Reynolds and this mega celebrity to essentially accept Lively's rewrites of a key scene of the film. And that this meeting happened at Lively's penthouse where Reynolds and this mega celebrity spoke to Baldoni, basically praising her rewrites. And to be clear, not directly telling him to make any changes, but Baldoni claims he felt the pressure of them. And while Taylor Swift isn't mentioned directly in that conversation, in a text message about this, the name Taylor is written. And we believe this mega celebrity to be Taylor Swift. Now, the message is actually purportedly from Baldoni to Lively, where it reads, "Also was working on rooftop scene today. I really love what you did. It really does help a lot, makes it so much more fun and interesting, and I would have felt that way without Ryan and Taylor." And then Lively seemingly writes back, "Both Ryan and redacted have established themselves as absolute titans. They also know I'm not always good at making sure I'm seen and utilized for fear of threatening egos or fear of affecting the ease of the process. They don't give an S about that, and because of that, everyone listens to them with immense respect and enthusiasm." And then she apparently refers to herself at one point as Khaleesi from Game of Thrones and comments to having dragons who will protect her, seemingly alluding to Reynolds and Swift. So from that alone, Bradford, do you think Taylor Swift will be deposed?
So this is kind of a loaded question from that alone. So from that alone, so you have essentially one party talking about this other party, where it gets a little bit into the gray area of why I think that it may be necessary to depose her, but she may not have good things to say about Baldoni. You just don't know what she's going to say overall yet. What I think is, because Baldoni texted back and said, "I would have thought that way anyways, even without Taylor and your husband," I think that opens the door to, okay, well, what did Taylor tell him, or was she present? The understanding that I have is that on Baldoni's way out, Taylor Swift was walking in and they kind of had niceties between them, but there was no real conversation about what was going to go on. So it's kind of a little bit of a quagmire. There's certainly an argument to say her deposition shouldn't be taken. She knows nothing about this. It was a passing kind of thing. But as you know, every lawyer knows, depositions and discovery are quite broad when it comes to individuals that have any kind of knowledge. Even if that knowledge might not be admissible in court, it still would be something to explore. So if I take her knowledge and it's got hearsay in it and all these other things, but it might lead me to other discoverable evidence, you can make the argument that you need to depose her. So
Yeah.
I think that if the argument is made, I think they will probably have to depose her. I think Taylor Swift will hire a very high-powered law firm to argue against having her deposed. I remember Drake hired me in a murder case that was going on. They were trying to depose Drake, and I opposed him being deposed because he had no knowledge whatsoever. Service was incorrect. There was a bunch of issues, and I ended up winning. So do I think that there's a way for Taylor Swift to win and not be deposed? Certainly. There's always a way to win. That's always my attitude.
Right. Just to be clear, you're saying that even if she were deposed, that doesn't mean that she would necessarily have to testify at an upcoming trial, right?
Correct. Her testimony might be complete hearsay. It might have no relevance to what's going on. But just because you take a deposition doesn't mean like they're going to use you in a trial. And also, I don't even know what her knowledge is. Like, only Baldoni knows, and the parties that are involved would know.
I think the counter argument would be, and I'll get to this in a minute, she had no idea about what was going on between Baldoni and Blake Lively. That could be a fair argument. But the argument would be, if you listen to Baldoni's side, that Blake Lively specifically invited Taylor Swift to come over, knowing Baldoni was going to be there, hoping that she would say something about her rewrites to Baldoni, and he would say, it was that indirect pressure I felt to accept her changes, that indirect pressure I felt to write a text message like this. Oh, your script revisions were great. I didn't need to hear from Ryan and Taylor about this. That would be the argument. And I'm assuming she would say, what did you talk about with Justin Baldoni? And what did Blake Lively tell you? How did she invite you over to the penthouse that night? I think that's probably the relevance of that, if you ask me.
Sure. And it goes down that road. The key here is I'd probably take Blake Lively's testimony first, right? To determine whether or not Taylor Swift then comes in. So if Blake Lively comes in and says, hey, listen, here's a conversation I had with Taylor Swift and didn't mention anything about Baldoni. Here's the text I had with her. Here's other evidence, because don't forget, you're going to do discovery now between then and the deposition. So all this discovery about text messages and emails and phone calls are going to come in first, right? So then you take Blake Lively's deposition, and Blake Lively said, Taylor Swift didn't know anything. That's my fault. I was BSing. I thought that it might help because I wasn't being heard. So that's why I brought her name into it. If she says that, then it's less likely that you would need Taylor Swift. Now, the counter argument is, great, that's what you say, but let me hear from Taylor Swift and see what she says. And Taylor Swift comes in and says, listen, I had no clue, and I don't know what's going on. I'm not a T Swift fan, but at the same point, this happens a lot where people use.
Did you just admit that? Did you just admit that you're not a T Swift fan? Because you're about to get a lot of hate. Let me tell you. You're about to get a lot of hate.
I'm an AC/DC guy, so I'm not a T Swifter. But
good luck, Bradford. Good luck. Let me ask you this, by the way, really important. Would we know? Pressure? That is the pressure. Would we know if she gets deposed? Would we ever see a copy of it? Remember, this is a case that's almost being litigated in the public. If there was a deposition that came out that was beneficial to Blake Lively or beneficial to Justin Baldoni, would we see it before a trial?
My guess is yes. And then the actual depo itself, probably not. You'll see that it was filed a motion to take the depo. You'll see the objection to the depo. Then an actual depo gets taken, and if it's very positive for Baldoni, I think that some sort of motion will be filed that those depositions can't be leaked. I don't know how the judge will rule on it. Knowing this judge like I know him, my guess is that he's going to say, hey, any depositions that are taken are going to be between the parties. Those aren't to be disclosed. But what Baldoni's attorney will do, or Taylor Swift's attorney, I think at this point they've kind of caught on to the game, is that if there's a positive deposition in favor of one of their sides, they'll file a motion and they'll attach a portion of the deposition to that motion saying, like, this is what was said.
Right. Okay, let me ask you this. I'll let you read between the tea leaves here. So Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, he went on this podcast. It's called the Two Angry Men podcast. It was just a few days ago. It was after the first court hearing. This is what he said. I don't know that we're going to depose Taylor Swift or not. I think that's going to be probably a game time decision. Anyone that reasonably has information that can provide evidence in this case is going to be deposed. I mean, for sure. Radford, what does that mean?
He's not saying he's going to take her depo, because I'm sure he's throwing that out there so that Taylor Swift's attorneys will reach out to him and say like, hey, listen, guys, she doesn't know anything. Maybe she'll provide an affidavit that says, I don't know anything. I was never contacted, all these different things to avoid taking a deposition. So like I said before, I really like Baldoni's lawyer. I think he's smart because of the way he's going about things. These overt like little messages that he's throwing out there into the public. It's like, hey, without saying Taylor Swift, reach out to me, Taylor Swift, reach out to me. Let's see if we can come to an agreement where I'm not taking your depo because you could just answer these questions for me. And if you tell me this is what happened, you give me an affidavit, you give me something like that, maybe we can avoid this all ugly deposition. I don't have to start finding out about what time you went over and what discussions you had with her. As long as you give me something that establishes there was no discussion about Baldoni or about a sex harassment or anything like that, if you can tell me that you're her best friend, then I probably won't take your deposition. I think that's why he's saying like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to take your depo yet.
By the way, this comment on a podcast like this, talking about it, that doesn't violate the court's order, because remember, there was a hearing at the beginning of the week where the judge warned both sides not to make any public comments about the case that could, materially prejudice the case, meaning prejudice a potential future jury. Comments like this are fine, right?
Yeah, I think like as you're talking about administrative stuff, as you're talking about dates, as you're talking about strategy, which again, that's not really a strategy discussion, but as you're talking about like, hey, I hope to get depositions in the next 6 months. That's not really going to the heart of the case. You're not discussing the facts that are going on. So I don't think this is going to be a violation of anything. And it's an interesting way he's going about it.
So Taylor Swift also comes up in another way too. So if you go to the timeline document that was posted on that website, the lawsuitinfo.com, seemingly launched by Baldoni's side last weekend, there is a specific reference to Swift. So again, this is Baldoni's version of events, and he has made the argument, though, that Lively was essentially bullying him and taking control of the film, from wardrobe to editing. But this is what the doc says. May 2nd, 2024. While Lively is holding the film hostage in the edit room, she is simultaneously stalling the film's marketing by refusing to approve key materials, including the trailer release. With less than 3 months until the film's premiere, Sony becomes increasingly alarmed about the delayed rollout of the trailer, a cornerstone of the promotional campaign. In a text exchange between Heath, a Sony film executive, and a Sony marketing executive who had just spoken with Lively, they inform Heath, and this, by the way, is the CEO of Wayfair, of Lively's still escalating demands. Lively will not approve the trailer release unless she's granted more time in the edit room with her personal editor. Adding to the pressure, Lively made a veiled threat, implying she might change her mind about reaching out to Taylor Swift to secure the use of My Tears Ricochet for the trailer if her demands are not met. So Bradford, would that be something that Taylor Swift would be asked about too?
Yeah, of course. Those are all things that would be asked about if Taylor Swift was going to get her deposition taken. But again, I've had so many cases where there's high-profile individuals involved and someone will drop someone else's name.
Yeah.
It's like, if you don't do this, I could call up Bob Smith and see what he's doing with that. It's all a leverage play. So we don't know, is that leverage play for real? Is she actually telling Taylor Swift all these things? My guess is she's not. My guess is that she's dropping Taylor Swift's name because Taylor Swift is a juggernaut and people know, like, Taylor Swift puts out a text that says, I heard Brad Cohen doesn't listen to my songs. All of a sudden, Brad Cohen gets shelled. So same thing. She's dropping this name knowing that they are scared that maybe a song gets taken away, or maybe Taylor Swift says, this movie's not as good as I thought it would be. I mean, anything could happen. Or maybe they put out a text that says this movie's fantastic. And then all of a sudden, it goes through the roof. So all those things come into play. The likelihood that Taylor Swift knew about this, to me, is slim to none. Because I think Taylor Swift came out with a statement that said, listen, I don't know anything.
Yeah. Let me, I'm glad you mentioned that, because at the time of this broadcast, we don't believe Taylor Swift has actually responded to all of this, but Bradford, TMZ is reporting that a source close to Taylor Swift says the superstar is not too happy about being dragged into all of this and doesn't like being referred to as a dragon by Blake Lively in that text message. And that, again, according to the source reported by TMZ, she was invited to the penthouse, didn't even know Justin was going to be there. They also say that Lively and Swift have reportedly made up, though. And look, this is all gossip. We don't know for sure, but I got to imagine, Bradford, if you're Taylor Swift, you don't want this press. First of all, you don't want to be dragged into this mix. Number two, Look, if you look at a law and crime poll, what was it, 96, 98% of people that were surveyed, and I think you have quite a number of people who were surveyed, they're siding with Justin Baldoni. In a way, as this progresses, there is an argument that Blake Lively is becoming quite toxic. And I'm not saying that she'll not keep her as a friend, but from a professional and career point of view, also if you're Ryan Reynolds, this is hurting from a PR point of view. I imagine Taylor Swift does not want any part of this.
Ultimately, this is not a good idea for Taylor Swift to get involved in. I've always said, like, nobody wants to get involved in lawsuits to begin with. That's the start. But if you look at famous people that get involved in lawsuits that have nothing to do with them, it doesn't work out well for them, right? They take a side, or they make a mention, or they send a letter of support to, to the judge, even in criminal cases. None of that ever works out for the individual. So I can't imagine, even if, Taylor Swift, loves Blake Lively to death, they're best friends, thick and thin, I can't imagine that she'd want to get involved in this mess, because it is a mess. It is lawsuit after lawsuit, this person suing this one, this person suing this one, and I wouldn't put it past Justin Baldoni's lawyer put together enough stuff to fire off something against Taylor Swift if Taylor Swift all of a sudden changes her tune and says, I knew I was going to the house and I knew I was going to discuss these things. I honestly think Taylor Swift didn't know what was going on. I think she was tugged into this thing by Blake Lively. And like I said, the texts speak for themselves. And lawsuits, by the way, just not to get off subject, but lawsuits have taken such a turn with smartphones, with emails, with texting, with phone calls. It is so easy to trace and find out and look at things and determine where people were, even from your phone, to see if they were in the same position at the same time,
right,
or if Taylor Swift was downstairs at a coffee shop waiting to come upstairs. All these different things are so discoverable. It's hard to avoid.
You mentioned a mess, because I wanted to make a little point of clarity with you here, because I wanted to ask this more broadly. The claim that she took control of the movie, Blake Lively. The idea would be, she weaponized false allegations against Justin Baldoni to get her way. And when you think about something like that, I just want to go into something from the amended complaint in this case and then want your perspective. So Baldoni's team alleges, quote, ignoring the director's vision for her character and disposing of the weeks of effort and creativity spent by the wardrobe team on shopping and carefully crafting her wardrobe, Lively sent hundreds of images to the film's costume designer, including into the late hours of the evening, depicting the style of wardrobe she wanted for her character. The costume designer had to reshop Lively's wardrobe, far exceeding the allocated budget and diverting time and resources while also preparing wardrobes for the rest of the cast. At one point, Lively insisted that her character had money and could afford $5,000 shoes, despite being a fledgling small business owner. This forced Baldoni to rethink the entire script that had been in the works for well over a year. It was approved by both Sony and Wayfair, a script that Wayfair had commissioned multiple drafts of, incorporated countless notes, including input from the book's author, Colleen Hoover. The wardrobe budget ballooned. Now, you hear that, but then People magazine, reported that a source close to Blake Lively said being upset about the wardrobe in a movie is not a legal claim, but sexual harassment absolutely is. Unlike Baldoni's efforts to confuse and distract with an irrelevant sideshow, Blake has filed serious, credible allegations that she was sexually harassed, spoke out and took steps to stop the harassment, and then was retaliated against. And that's the question I have for you, Bradford. The allegations, she took control of the movie, she was ballooning it up, she was changing the script, the wardrobe, he felt pressured to accept their demands. How exactly is that relevant and respond to the direct claims of sexual harassment and retaliation?
Okay, it doesn't, right? It is trying to undermine her credibility, which is the point that they're getting at, right? The fact of whether or not this is the legality of her wanting to change her dress to a different dress, that is of no consequence. What he's essentially saying is, number one is it will undermine her credibility as to the sexual harassment things, with the emails, the texts, the phone calls that were made, the different things that were happening on set, and all those different kind of things. Number one is that. Number two is it tries to bolster his claims of defamation, of that she made this up. This claim of sexual harassment is completely made up. So legally, it's not a cause of action, but it tries to bolster his other accusations that this is all made up. This is what she was doing. It wasn't that she was being sexually harassed. It was that she was taking control of this movie. She had every aspect of this movie under control. So if I was sexually harassing her, Why would she be complaining about the wardrobe? Why wouldn't she be saying like, hey, listen, this guy's doing this or this guy's doing that? And that wasn't what was done. That's the point. What I think also is interesting, I want to make this point, is 98% of the people polled say, hey, we believe Baldoni over Blake Lively. But I will guarantee you that 99% of that 98% didn't read Blake Lively's complaint. These people are going on what is in the press. No one is actually taking the time to go through like all these polls that everyone's taking. It's because Baldoni's lawyer is doing an excellent job of leaking evidence, of leaking voicemails, of going on the air, saying all these different things. He's doing a phenomenal job of it. And Blake Lively's lawyers really don't have the receipts. And Baldoni's lawyer is leaking it drip by drip by drip by drip. And so you keep hearing about these things about Baldoni, and you don't keep hearing things about her side.
Well, look, I will say this. I think it all comes down to what happened on that set. And there's two different scenarios. There's one, she really was sexually harassed, and she came forward with a 17-point list that he agreed to. And if you believe her side, he agreed to it because he didn't want any of this coming out. Maybe he's like, I'll just do and say whatever you need. I don't want any of this stuff coming out. Or you go his side. I never did any of this. She's misinterpreting it. That's why they put forward some evidence to say she's mischaracterizing what happened. She's a big star. She's married to a big star, has friends who are big stars. I just, again, needed to say and do whatever I had to. You want to accuse me of this? I'm going to deny it, but I want this movie to be made. I felt the pressure. I got a PR team to, back me up in case you come out with false allegations. Two different sides. I think it all comes down to what happened on the set. But I will ask you this. So I mentioned this yesterday. I had to ask you about it. This was another big update where Blake Lively has just been sued by Jed Wallace. So Wallace was originally named as a defendant in Blake Lively's original complaint, the one that she filed with the California Civil Rights Department. This is before it actually matured into a federal lawsuit. But he is not named as a defendant in the actual federal lawsuit, just that first complaint. And he claims the damage was already done, that she falsely accused him of being part of this smear campaign, that he's a crisis management specialist, and that he was working on this smear campaign against her. In fact, as described in her complaint, it says that Wallace weaponized a digital army around the country from New York to LA to create, seed, and promote content that appeared to be authentic on social media platforms and internet chat forums. And we did a whole breakdown of this on a previous sidebar yesterday, where there were actually text messages that are embedded into Lively's complaint that seemingly refer to Jed Wallace. Messages between the different players and defendants in Lively's action. Messages like, we've also started to see a shift on social, due largely to Jed and his team's efforts to shift the narrative towards shining a spotlight on Blake and Ryan. Or, we're crushing it on Reddit. Jed. Now, Bradford, I'm curious, the fact that he was listed as a defendant in the original CRD complaint, not her actual lawsuit, is that grounds to sue and win for defamation? Because I imagine she could turn around and just name him as a defendant.
Number one is she could turn around and name him as defendant. Number two is I think his lawsuit gets dismissed. I don't see how he's going to maintain a lawsuit based on an accusation and with evidence behind it. It's not like it's a blind accusation that's proven to be a complete and utter lie. That's not where they're at. So I don't think his lawsuit goes very far. And I think that her lawyers could add him to this lawsuit. I don't know if they need him. I don't think they need him in the lawsuit as much as they need him as a witness. That being said, once you fire that shot, I always tell people, like, when you are creating a lawsuit, I always tell them, hey, listen, this is what the other side's going to do. This is what the other side's going to say. I'm an offense guy. So when my clients get sued, I'm always suing back. I'm always filing counterclaims because there's always two sides to that story. And if you're not on the offense and you're just defending, then they know how weak you are. You have to go on the offense. You have to attack back because that is the only way that anyone understands that this is not a free-for-all. So that's what Baldoni did. I think he's doing a good job of it. I don't think that Blake Lively's attorneys did a bad job of it. I just think they took their shotgun and fired all their rounds with the complaint and with the evidence with that complaint. And Baldoni's lawyers are firing one round at a time. They come out every week. They come out. They understand that the news cycle is 24 to 48 hours, and they're just doing it slowly and surely. They're coming out and coming out and coming out. And that's why I think they're winning in the court of public opinion.
And look, public sentiment could change. There's a debate about whether or not they'll settle this. Will they take it to trial? I did want to ask you this, though, about one more thing about Jed Wallace. He's also asked for a declaratory judgment, which my understanding would be basically the court stepping in and through an order confirming that neither he nor his company, Street Relations, breached any contract, that they didn't engage in any acts of harassment or retaliation against Blake Lively, that he didn't engage in any, smear campaign against her. What's the likelihood, if I'm understanding correctly, what's the likelihood that the court would actually issue a declaratory judgment like that? Because I imagine if the court did do that, that would prevent him from being named as a defendant by Blake Lively.
Slim to none. I don't think he's going to get a court to make that determination. What a declaratory judgment normally does is they say, hey, I want a declaratory judgment on whether or not a contract exists or something along those lines where a court can just say, okay, I've looked at this. This is what I say exists, or this is what it looks like. They don't go into details of whether or not you were defamed or you breached a contract. I don't believe that the court is going to do that. I don't think that has much of a shot. I think that he's going to have to either file his lawsuit or get sued or whatever they're going to do, because a declaratory judgment saying, hey, I didn't do anything wrong, I want the court to verify that I didn't do anything wrong, I think is very unlikely.
Yeah, I said it yesterday that it's very rare that the court would do that at this stage. I mean, they would like the evidence to develop before they just issue a final judgment like that. So Listen, Bradford, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. I'm not going to lie to you. Your Taylor Swift comment is probably going to get you a little bit of hate, but I know you got thick skin. But thanks so much for coming on and telling us like it is.
Thanks, man.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now